Thank you, UCBS. And good morning to you all. Thank you, Marie, for that presentation. It was quite enlightening. And I'm glad to be coming after you because my focus is really quite an African one. And it really is the story of Africa in looking at where we are coming from and where we're going to. As I stand before you today, I'm looking at how we as Barclays Africa, Absa in South Africa, have adopted the shared growth and the shared value proposition. And looking at it in the context of South Africa and in the context of Africa as looking at what we have been doing, but also quite importantly, looking at where Africa is going. For a long time, there has been a narrative that Africa was the dark continent, and Africa was one of those continents that was not growing or going anywhere. But that narrative changed in the 2000s, and as you'll see in that slide, that we moved away from that discourse and that narrative to having a narrative that looks at Africa rising. And I remember that famous Economist article really looked at how, if you look within the African context and in the African narrative, Africa across the globe was the continent that was growing. Africa was the continent that had a young population relative to all the other continents that actually had an aging population. Secondly, Africa was seen as the continent that had the most resources and the ability to grow, whereas the other continents were not actually doing that. So if we started looking at where we were as a business within that context, particularly looking at Barclays Africa, we started looking at what are the challenges that potentially exist in slowing the growth of Africa. And if we look at our GDP, in 2010 to 2015, it actually began to slow down from 5% to 3%. But this was nuanced in particular areas. But we still saw that there was some increased growth in particular areas, East Africa being one. But the key challenges that face us from a continental perspective in our understanding as Barclays Africa and where we would like to make the most meaningful impact is in three areas. We've looked at the unemployment issue, the unemployment crisis, particularly focusing on the young people. And despite the demographic dividend that we have as an African continent, most of the young people cannot access jobs and opportunities, whether be it large corporates or even to start their own businesses. So we do, in South Africa, I think if I can say not the absolute or relative percentage of unemployment, it sits above 40%. And the challenges that we face within that is that we find that most of the young people actually cannot access opportunities in the private sector or even in the public sector. The second challenge that we have, particularly in South Africa and some of our African markets that we operate in, is that many young people lack the skills to access the employment, so they are unemployable. And I think that's a very important point. So beyond not being able to get a job because you have the skills, but there are a large majority of young people in our country and on the continent who are unemployable, meaning the skills that they have or the education level that they have does not allow them to get a job. So they need to look for alternative solutions. And I think further, this is compounded by the fact that there actually are very few jobs that they can tap into or they can get into. And that in itself presents another challenge, but at the same time, it's an opportunity to redirect that energy and those skills towards starting small businesses and innovating in different ways. Another area for us which we have looked at is rapid urbanization. It can present both pros and cons. From a pros perspective, it increases household consumption, therefore opening new markets, new opportunities that we as a business can tap into. But at the same time, because of the poor infrastructure, some levels of poor governance, we actually cannot absorb the rural to urban migration we experience. So you'll find the development of informal settlements, the slums, and we need to start looking at how as a continent, as the different countries, government and private sector, can address some of those challenges. But today, I think for us, within the financial services sector, a key area that we have strongly looked at and decided to focus quite profoundly is the area of financial exclusion. A majority of the people across the continent do not have bank accounts, do not have access to financial services, nor the basic means to be able to transact. For us, that makes a majority of people not able to actively engage in the different economies, but also not able to grow and make a meaningful contribution to the GDP and the growth of their countries. So for us, the key focus areas as a business, we decided, given the color that I've given, was to look at how we as a business can transition away from just pure grant-making, CSR, philanthropy, to one where we start engaging meaningfully with some of the challenges I've articulated today. And that process itself took us over a couple of decades, where we moved away from, in the 1990s, where our pure focus was around philanthropy. In the 2000s, we were funding over 200 NGOs, and our challenge there was, when we looked at the social return on investment, we actually could not articulate it. It was very fragmented. We were not able to say, with all the funding that we've spent across the continent, we were in 13 or so countries at the time, what social impact have we created as a Pan-African business, nor even in that country. But beyond that, what is the business impact that we realize from the investments that we've made? So our business, for example, is over 3 trillion capitalized. So if we look at the amount of contribution that we make within the business, but also what we can potentially contribute if we take just maybe 1% net profit after tax, if we're to take the regulatory spend in South Africa, it runs into hundreds of millions. But we could not actually look at and see what value we had created. If we went into a community today, we were not able to articulate and point out that this is the impact we've created. For us, that was a very important milestone, where we actually stopped and re-looked at our strategies. That led us to starting to look across the continent, across the globe, to find what are the innovative strategies that we can begin looking into and engaging as Barclays Africa, but also Barclays globally. How do we meaningfully contribute into the communities and the markets that we're operating in, engage in the right kind of conversations, challenge the right things within our societies and communities, participate in advocacy, policy discussions, and start making a meaningful contribution within that? We decided, as Marie mentioned as well, and as Marc, that creating shared value was the next level for us. So we moved away from looking at and funding purely CSI projects and started focusing on how we change our own operating model, what our business strategy looks like, and understanding that the shared value principles or the shared value concept essentially was a philosophy that we as a business could adopt and make sure that it's an integral part of our business strategy. With the revision of our strategy, we started looking at how shared value principles and the application of using shared value can actually, for us, be more meaningful. But beyond just creating value, we wanted to lead to growth. So we customized it as well and developed a shared growth strategy. The shared growth strategy basically for us was, firstly, shifting the mindset of our leaders, and they being the key proponents of driving the strategy forward at a board level, at a CEO Bagel Exco level. Bagel stands for Barclays Africa Group Limited. That group of people literally drove the strategy, understood the strategy, so we needed the top-down level of sponsorship to shift the organization away from a CSI philanthropic grant-making approach to one where we start looking at it being a front and center part of the business strategy and key to how the way we do business. From a bottom-up perspective, we worked quite closely with the business units to understand what were the key principles and solutions that we could engage in as a business, core to our products, services, and also looking at what our corporate assets and expertise that we could deploy to challenge and to deal with some of the challenges that I mentioned earlier. We steered away from just doing good, and we started looking at how we can create economic and societal value relative to the cost. Essentially, what we wanted to do was to take a step back and measure our social return on investment. But beyond that, to start looking at what the key return on investments are from a commercial perspective as much as we can do the social perspective. We identified 3 areas that we believe can best set us up with relevance in the African continent to drive and deliver our shared growth agenda. We identified 3 areas. Education and skills development was a key area for us, particularly anchored around supporting the youth. Youth primarily being the age of 16 to 35. And there we looked at how we can impact the challenge of matching skills, supply and demand of young people. So we looked at employability programs within that. I'll speak to that a bit later. The second area of focus for us was enterprise development. Enterprise development because if you look at large corporates like us, we are actually shrinking from a labor absorption perspective. We're digitizing more than we are actually using labor. But the actual focus area, if we drive young people towards starting small businesses, SMEs can become the engine of the growth of our African economies. And last but not least, very close to our business model and what we deliver, our core value proposition was financial inclusion. We looked at what inclusive banking looks like, what are the key products and services we should be introducing into the different markets. Are they relatively priced? Are they affordable? Are they reachable? Do they meet the needs of the people that we want to serve? Most importantly, we were looking at how we can help you bank where you are. And for that, it was upsetting our own traditional banking method of looking at how many branch networks we have and expecting that people will come into branches, but rather challenging our models to say, let people bank where they are, reduce the cost of travel to come to get our service, but actually start looking at how we can introduce more financial products and services to enable people to engage effectively in the economy. As mentioned earlier, this is one of our key initiatives within our education and skills portfolio. And it addresses the first point I raised around the challenges that young people have from an unemployment perspective. The challenge that we find, and we particularly address within this program, is the unemployable challenge. Young people have got the basic education skills that they have, and we did extensive research in all the markets we operate in. And I will mention some of the markets: South Africa, Tanzania, Zambia, Egypt at the time, Uganda, Ghana, Kenya. So you can see our research was quite extensive. We did focus group discussions, we did surveys, and we worked with implementing partners to understand some of the challenges that are experienced within their markets. And as we began to build out an approach, we also engaged some of our corporates, because as a large corporate, we employ over 42,000 people across the continent. We have noticed that those who we do employ take 3 to 4 months to become productive. So they struggle with the requisite skills they need to land effectively within our work environment. So with that, we actually looked at how we bridge that as well. But secondly, we also looked at how we can increase their employability, their labor absorption, be it starting a business or getting into being absorbed in small and medium enterprises as well, but also participating effectively within the economy. We developed a free online curriculum, Ready to Work, which basically addresses 4 key areas. We worked with a learning and development institution that developed these particular modules, and we ensure that they're deployed online, and that is mobile, and that is particularly with the recognition that young people have leapfrogged from they did not actually get into the computer desktop phase. They went straight to mobile. So they learn best from a mobile tablet or a mobile phone. So our curriculum is deployed primarily online, and it can be, and it takes you through a self-learning program. But also, we decided to partner with some institutions who are accredited and can provide that training across. For us, we have trained to date over 200,000 young people within this program. But more importantly, we've started looking at how, beyond just the training, we can support them with placements, starting with ourselves. We have looked at making sure that some of the young people who go through this training are part of our HR programs, our learnerships, our internships, and they get jobs within the company. And the next level for us with this particular program is rallying other corporates to hold hands, and we see how these young people who've got the requisite skills can get into their companies as well. In South Africa, we've got quite an enabling infrastructure that drives a learnership program through our skills development program. We've also got SETAs that can also drive that. So we're working with government and with other corporates to see how we can absorb the young people. Within the SME space or enterprise development, we have looked at how we can help small and medium-sized businesses to drive and grow our economies. As a business, this one literally is driven by our key business units, driven by this enterprise development, our business banking, and our corporate investment banking portfolio business units. And here we looked at the scale of our operations. I'm giving the example of South Africa here. How big are operations in South Africa, and how can we use and leverage these operations to actually drive and promote enterprise development in the different provinces and the different cities that we're operating in. And if you look at that scale, we're actually using some of our infrastructure, are able to deploy as a basic enterprise development training and support and business development support to some of the SMEs that are within our communities. But secondly, we have an internal approach as much as we have an external approach. From an internal perspective, with our sourcing and procurement department, they have developed flagship initiatives that are looking at how we can upskill SMEs to diversify our own supplier database to make sure that we absorb small businesses and they can procure from us. And the leaders within that space are looking at what percentage they can diversify and grow our portfolio within that. Our spend within that space runs into billions, and we're looking at how we as a corporate can actually absorb and get in more SMEs to get business from us. But also, we've also looked at it from the perspective of our business lines and started ensuring that some of our businesses are procuring and supplying small SMEs directly and working to grow them, transform them, and make them more industry-wide and grow from that perspective. But also beyond that, when I look at the financial inclusion, as mentioned earlier, 88% of sub-Saharan Africa is financially excluded, compared to 58% in East Africa and 8% in high-income OECD countries. So when we have looked at where our presence primarily is and how we are operating, we have started looking at turning the model upside down. Instead of driving our participation in inclusive banking from a branch footprint physical presence perspective, we've looked at technology and introducing mobile banking and mobile processes, mobile financial services to a bulk of our people. And for us, we believe that to accelerate and achieve inclusive growth across the continent, as a large corporate, we have approached it from two perspectives. Technology is a solution in terms of driving how we can achieve the growth that we're looking for in Africa. As mentioned earlier, the education and skills portfolio that we drive is driven through a digital platform. But more importantly, from an inclusive banking perspective and financial services, we're diversifying our own portfolio and innovating around it to make sure most of our services are deployed through technology. The second leg is collaboration. I do not think there is any one organization that can stand here in front of you today and say, we can do it alone. We believe collaboration, be it public-private partnerships, are key to actually achieving and driving some of the sustainable change we want to see. But also what we are challenging ourselves is saying, as a large corporate and with other businesses, be it small businesses, government, civil society, we can start looking at the sustainable development goals as opportunities to expand and grow our own businesses. If we turn it around and start looking at the purpose and the social change, we can actually start deriving some business models and unlock different markets by looking at challenging and impacting some of our social challenges. So today as Barclays Africa, we actually have managed to achieve quite significant impact, but I'm very quick to say, within our shared value journey, we're still in infancy. We have not grown or have moved in the value chain extensively. We have just started that journey, and we are in our second year of implementation, measuring activities and outputs, and we have seen that taking on this journey and walking this way, we can achieve significant impact and change within not only the communities we operate in, but within our business as well. I'll make the last point around part of our business that has actually not completely, but have started the journey of transformation, and that is our, call it CRES. It's a real estate. Corporate real estate, yes. We have a huge property portfolio, obviously, because of our branches and because of our corporate offices. And that part of our business, which also looks at the sustainability agenda, our impact on the environment, our carbon footprint, have also looked at how they can impact young people by training and capacity building, introducing them to the fact that bankers also have property real estate people within our organization and how they can run academies to support that. But beyond that, working with the TVET space in South Africa, they're looking at how they can pull in the young artisans, the plumbers, to come and learn from the bank, but also intern and expand that. And they have looked at how best they can do that through their own skills, sharing our own corporate assets and expertise to drive the economic growth of our country, but most importantly, drive the development of the young people in our country. Thank you.